On January 9th, 2024, armed men raided a TV station in Ecuador and took the crew hostage during a live broadcast. In the following days, there were explosions in the streets, riots erupted in prisons, and police officers were kidnapped by gangs with links to drug cartels. Ecuador, once known as South America's safest country, spiraled into disarray.
Ecuador is under lockdown tonight as government forces clash with drug cartels across the country.
Its president, Daniel Noboa, declared a state of emergency. But what triggered the violence? Shifting dynamics in South America's drug trade saw cocaine operations move from neighboring Colombia into Ecuador. Homicide rates in the country soared, fueled mainly by the violence between rival drug gangs. Then in January came a breaking point.
Ecuador has launched a nationwide operation to locate a drug lord who disappeared from jail.
Fito, the leader of one of Ecuador's most notorious drug cartels, escaped from prison. A nationwide manhunt began. The police were given power to raid people's homes, and the military were brought in to bring order back to prisons. President Daniel Noboa declared a war on the criminal gangs. A year on from the chaos, is Noboa winning the war on drugs? Is this hardline approach working? And what does the government need to do to bring peace back to Ecuador? Cocaine exploded in popularity in Europe and the US during the cultural and economic revolution of the 1980s. Narco kings like Pablo Escobar ran enormous cocaine empires, producing the drug in Colombia and distributing it via routes through the Caribbean. Today, cocaine consumption is at a record high, and while empires fell and new gangs emerged, trafficking routes out of Colombia continued for decades. That was until a recent major development.
Really, the moment was 2016, when in neighbouring Colombia there was a peace deal between the government and the FARC Marxist rebel group.
After which the cocoa crops in Colombia moved to the border with Ecuador in Nariño and Putumayo.
That involved then the FARC guerrillas putting down their arms. One of the consequences of that was they had to withdraw from participation in the drug trade.
So the criminal groups needed a place for the drugs to be exported.
There was suddenly a sort of gap in the market, which quite quickly got filled by various other criminal groups.
They turned to Ecuador as the ideal place for this.
Because it wasn't sort of a monopoly as it had been before, they began to fight amongst each other, and that's when you began to see this deterioration.
The port city of Guayaquil became the home of Ecuador's drug trade. It was the hub for routes through the Pacific and into Mexico. Cocaine could be hidden in shipping containers, and the port's lack security meant activities could be hidden in plain sight. The drug trade out of Ecuador grew from around $363 million in 2016 to $953 million in 2021, and the vast sums of money in circulation compromised the integrity of the country's state-run services.
The other thing that the cartels managed to do very effectively was use the prisons as their base.
Be it from poor security or corrupt management, the prison system somehow allowed gang leader Fito to film a music video while inside a high-security jail.
Those prisons had, rather than becoming sort of dens of punishment, had become schools, really, universities, where criminals could be taught the process of forming a cartel, of exporting drugs. They really had the whole roost to their own.
Following the escape of Fito from prison, drug gangs had demonstrated that they were the ones in control in Ecuador.
They basically highlighted the country's security problems to the world and revealed that these criminal groups have the ability to disrupt public order, public life, to paralyze the country.
In response, President Noboa used constitutional powers to militarize his campaign. He declared an internal armed conflict and named 24 criminal gangs as terrorist organizations. The homes of suspected gang members were raided, the military took control of the unruly prisons, and a number of high-profile gang leader arrests were made.
He has fronted a very hard line against drug cartels in Ecuador.
These two measures together meant that the military were able to be deployed out in the streets, support the police in their fight against organized crime.
There are very clear similarities with what happened in El Salvador under President Bukele, who arrested 70,000 gang members, identifying them just by having tattoos. Very hard line that worked.
The government says it has dramatically reduced the number of violent deaths and eliminated the power of organised gangs in prisons. But is it winning the overall war against drug cartels?
There's definitely a slight improvement in terms of reduction of violent deaths, meaning homicides, but the number is still very high.
The fear is that if this doesn't work, you get this failed state. You get a rather weak country in the middle of South America that becomes a gangland, really.
There's also concerns about the human rights violations.
One of the most shocking examples happened in December 2024, when 4 boys aged between 11 and 15 went missing while reportedly playing football in Guayaquil. Ecuador's Congress released unverified video that appeared to show soldiers beating one of the minors. The soldiers were said to have been responding to an armed robbery. The military claimed the boys had been released on the same night and that gangs were to blame for their disappearance. But on Christmas Eve 2024, the burned remains of the 4 boys were found. The soldiers are now under investigation for the boys' disappearance, but deny any wrongdoing.
We're seeing a new violent dynamic in the country in which the military have a bigger role.
There is a cost to tackling drug cartels for public officials too. On January 17, 2024, Cesar Suarez, the public prosecutor who led the investigation into the TV station attack, was shot and killed in Guayaquil. And on June 2, 2024, Christian Nieto, a government official, was killed inside a circus in Manta alongside his wife and a passerby.
These types of jobs have become very high risk.
If you're an Ecuadorian prosecutor earning a modest income, do you really want to continue doing so when you're getting death threats both to you and your family?
Noboa's war on criminal gangs has seen glimmers of success. But what more can be done to tackle the issue beyond military force?
Maintaining the military on the streets, maintaining the military deployed in the prisons indefinitely is costly and is unsustainable in the long term.
Experts in the field repeatedly say is you've got to follow the money. International cooperation on that, tracking down where this money's going, where it's being banked, that is quite a good way of getting at these criminal groups where it really hurts.
Ecuador looks set to continue its hardline war with drug gangs. But will the cost to the lives of public officials and the rights of regular Ecuadorians be a price worth paying?